This will probably look familiar to you. Now, if you play like that, that is not because you have a lack of talent, it's because you're not practicing properly. Hello, welcome to the Heart of the Piano YouTube channel. I'm Bob Rose, and today in this video, I'm going to be describing to you one of the major differences between a super top-notch professional pianist and an amateur pianist. What happens a lot of the time is people think that they come for piano lessons, and the reason why they're not good is because their scales aren't good enough, their technique isn't good enough, they don't know enough. And what they want from the teacher, they expect that they come for lessons and the teacher is going to give them some sort of magical wisdom that immediately makes them go, this is the thing I have to do. The teacher shows them, this is how you move your hands. This is how you play scales. This is the technique that you need. And instantly they become amazing. And yeah, that stuff is important. And I teach all that stuff. But that's not actually the thing that's going to make the difference. And it's all just a means to an end. And also when people look at concert pianists, I think there's a misunderstanding that the thing that concert pianists have done, that piano students do to become concert pianists, is just work incredibly hard to move their fingers in the correct ways and play all the correct notes and get better and better technique until they just play amazingly. And, I'm afraid that's not how it works. Now, you have to have all that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you don't have to do that. You have to do that. But that's not the most important thing. That's not the thing that makes the difference. So I'm going to explain to you one of the things that makes the difference. Now, in my very previous video, I talked about the extra special magical ingredient, which really separates what it is to be musical. And what that was basically you have to feel love. Every single note that you play, you've got to feel love towards it. Now, this is not what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm going to talk about something much more tangible. And this tangible thing is basically the difference between listening horizontally and listening vertically. And very often when I talk about this with people, especially people who aren't my students, a lot of people say, what does that mean? That's what this video is about, and I'm going to try and demonstrate to you in as many different ways as I can. At the moment, I'm working on a jazz arrangement of a Chopin Nocturne. And so this Chopin Nocturne is probably a really good piece to illustrate to you some of why it's so important to play horizontally as a pianist, and why amateur pianists and beginner pianists just really tend to absolutely not play in a horizontal way. And I don't mean lying back in bed. That's not what I mean by horizontal. So anyway, let's take, this Chopin Nocturne. It's posthumous. It's the one in C sharp minor. So I'm just going to play it from this bit. Oh, by the way, I've got a sticking key. I've got a sticking C sharp key, which is so annoying because it's one of the most important keys. So apologies if it doesn't come out that often. But anyway, so so that's the one we're going to be looking at. I think most people know this one. It's one of the most popular classical pieces. So if I try and play this in a horizontal way, and by the way, I've not properly learned this piece. I'm only just looking at this because it's the original version of a jazz version that I'm working on. So horizontal would be like this. So that's, reasonably horizontal. And then vertical would be like how I think I hear most amateur pianists play, which would be something more like this. So that's like a vertical way. Horizontal So, I don't know, can you hear what the difference is? And I will explain it. Before I tell you, just have a little bit of a think about this. If you were a student of mine and right now I asked you, what do you think that difference is? What would you say to me? What words would you find to explain this difference between the horizontal and the vertical? Okay, so basically, the piano is essentially a percussion instrument. Every single time that we play a note, a hammer hits a string, there's like an attack of the sound. If you look at it in a graph, there would be an initial attack where it's super loud and then sort of tails off and then gradually tails away. The moment I've played that key, I cannot do anything further with that note. I can't vibrato. I can't, I'm a violinist and a guitarist as well. So if I was playing it on a violin, you play, you add vibrato, you can make it louder, you can change the tone, you can do all kinds of things with it. Also, if I sing, da, 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 it's not just ba, and then you've lost all control over the notes. So when we play the piano, I can no longer control it. It's gone. So it's tempting for pianists to only hear the very beginning of that note and then just stop listening to it, because what's the point? We can't do anything with it anymore. But the problem is that when we play music on the piano, we're not trying to sound like a percussion instrument. We're not trying to go bang, 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 bang. We are trying to sound like an orchestra. We're trying to sound like this is singing. Da 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 da. And I'm going to sing really badly. And I've said in previous videos that a lot of the time I ham up my bad singing because I don't want students to feel awkward and self-conscious about singing. So I'll properly, I'll sing badly on purpose to encourage the listeners, you guys, students, that you don't have to sing beautifully. Da, dum, da, 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 da. And the piano literally can't do this, but we are like magicians. We are using smoke and mirrors and hiding things up our sleeves and using misdirection to give the illusion that this is a singing tone. So hopefully you could hear that was one long melody. Dum, da, da, dum, da, dum. And not dum. And then the mind just immediately goes to the left hand. Then the mind goes to the left hand notes. This is how most beginners or non-professionals, most non-professional amateur pianists are going to play it in this kind of way, where everyone listens to these left hand notes instead of hearing. And then. So hopefully there is a magic telepathy, and I say this over and over again, that what I am imagining in my mind's ear, what I'm audiating is like the musician's equivalent of visualizing images, and we can imagine sound. And so when I'm playing, I'm not only am I listening to the note decay, so I'm literally listening to that top note decay instead of, and now just listening to the left hand and as if that top note just didn't exist. But not only am I listening to that top note decaying instead of listening to the left hand, I'm actually doing more than that. I am imagining like singing or a violin or some kind of dum. And if you look at the score, and I will be putting the score here, if you look at the score, there's a crescendo. And I think there is a meme of how to scare pianists, which is like you play a note and crescendo, but you kind of can crescendo because you can also use body language. And, there's a lot of research that shows that when audiences watch musicians and watch pianists, what you do physically affects how you hear. And, in another video, I talked about an optical illusion where if you watch someone say a particular word, what you hear changes depending on what you see the lips do. And I'll include a link to that in the description below. But, we are magicians. We use misdirection and sheer intention. If we imagine it strongly enough, I'm imagining that crescendo. And although, you don't hear it, if you hear it strongly enough, you can create that illusion in the ears of people who are listening to you. And the opposite of that just being, because the left hand is slightly more tricky, and all the right hand does is this. And the left hand is... which is more difficult, and it's filling in all the gaps. What most people do is their mind just gets pulled onto the thing that's slightly more difficult. So it's like, I'm going to exaggerate how people will hear this by just letting go of the note. You have to listen to this because it's a trill, and then... And I think this is how most amateurs kind of hear it, that top note just literally stops existing for them. Now, can you tell that I am listening? My attention is on the melody. My attention is not on the left hand. If I point somewhere, you'll go, what's he pointing at? I used to be a professional photographer, and, I used to find this incredibly amusing, that if I'm with a load of people and I point my camera somewhere unusual because I want to be creative, I want to find unusual things to photograph. And if I point my camera somewhere quite unusual, everyone around me will go, what's he pointing his camera at? And it's like that. There is a magic telepathy that if my attention, if my awareness is on the melody, now, if my awareness instead is just being pulled to the left-hand notes, and, I find it so difficult to just stop hearing the melody. It's like such an ingrained habit that let me try again really harder to just stop hearing the melody. Like here. So, can you hear the difference between that and... where I really am doing my utmost to focus on that top line. Now, in a lot of past videos and in my podcast as well, there'll be a link to the podcast below, I talk about the fact that for most of my life I've been interested in meditation, and I've been into Buddhism recently. And, we want to be in control of where our awareness is. And I think that for most amateur pianists, the mind gets pulled without any conscious decision about where it goes to. And again, because this is slightly trickier, most people cannot make the conscious decision to keep the listening, to keep the ear on that top note. Most people just get pulled. Because it's the hand doing the work. In one of my podcast episodes, I do a whole episode on the importance It's basically the key psychological skills. And I talk about the importance of spending a little bit of time, well, a lot of time in every practice session, deliberately choosing, where is my awareness going? Here, I could think about keeping my awareness on the top line. Then, for another 5 minutes, maybe I could focus on the tone colors, does it sound? Or, am I hearing beautiful tones, beautiful colors? I can spend, 5 minutes focusing on that. Maybe another 5 minutes focusing on rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. And, there's all these things that we can spend time focusing on. So again, there'll be a link to that below. And so like in meditation, the classic form of meditation is you sit and you just focus on your breath. And what usually happens is that, even with people who are really good meditators, you can't just sit there, focus on the breath, and that's it. I'm just focused on my breath. Because we're human beings, we have thoughts. The thoughts distract us. We have feelings. They distract us. So I sit here. The intention is to focus on the breath. And before I know it, it's like, what am I eating later on? Oh, God, this person said something that upset me earlier. What am I doing tomorrow? And I'm uncomfortable here and blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, you are not aware of what your breathing feels like. And it's similar. And, this is normal. And the way of getting better at meditating, it's like a muscle. And every single time that you notice that your attention has wandered, you just gently bring it back and accept that we're human beings and, this just happens. And the more you do it, the better you get at keeping your mind on the thing that you're trying to focus on. And here, instead of the breath, it's the sound. And so focusing on that melody, to come back to horizontal and vertical, focusing on that melody, I'll show you on the screen as I play. Can you see how that is just totally horizontal as opposed to bum 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. So, that's a much more vertical way. Now, another reason why people get pulled into a vertical way of hearing and of perceiving everything is that vertical is what happens when we are just trying to play all the correct notes. This correct note, 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 this correct note. So, this is a focus on all the correct notes. When we focus on the correct notes, we're no longer looking for the context, looking for the phrasing, looking for what joins them all together. It's literally this one, 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 rather than something that just kind of breathes, And I'm sure a lot of you will relate to this, will resonate with this, that when you're playing, and especially under pressure, you're in a lesson, you're performing, you want to put something on YouTube, or just any time that you're just a little bit unsure about yourself, you'll stare at your fingers, you'll stare at everything, or you'll stare at the music and go, because it's all about, is everything correct? This is all correct? And that kind of way of thinking, is everything correct? That just really makes everything sound incredibly vertical. So, if you can, see if you can encourage yourself to let go of, is every single note correct? Now, don't get me wrong, we want all the notes to be correct. We do. But it doesn't matter if some of them are a little bit wrong. And paradoxically, the more we worry, is every single note correct? I'm going to have to make a whole video on this at some point, but the more we worry about it, it's counterproductive, but it actually makes it more likely that we're going to play incorrect notes. So, one thing that we can do is to make it less likely that I'm going to play incorrect notes. Rather than thinking vertically, this note, this note, this note, this note, if I think of them all as one group, as like a C sharp minor, but I don't have to know in my head it's C sharp minor. It's just this shape. It's a horizontal way of perceiving it rather than almost as if these notes are just not related to each other. And so another reason why pianists get drawn into thinking of everything vertically is because we can play many notes all in one go. So actually, this will be a good time to switch to the jazz version that I've got here, because it's just going to show there's more going on. And then, certainly when we get to where it gets slightly more tricky with the left hand here, that would be so easy just to go. And, that's much more vertical thinking as opposed to just, really hearing this melody. And so on and so on. So what's the opposite of hearing horizontally? It's not just sort of bum, 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 one note at a time. If I go back to the Nocturne, listening vertically is also about hearing harmony. So, rather than just what we're actually hearing are these harmonies. So we're hearing C sharp minor. This is like a subdominant, it's like an F sharp minor, arguably. And then back to C sharp minor. Then we have a secondary dominant, C sharp dominant 7, leading us to the subdominant F sharp minor. And then here, this is like the dominant, leading us back into C sharp minor. And, this is the cornerstone of all of Western classical music. And, I'll talk about this in a whole different video, but this is what makes Western classical music relatively unique in the history of music that's ever existed, that it's very, very, very vertical. I don't think any other music that's ever existed on the planet has ever been this vertical. So you get harmonies as well as things that go horizontally. Now, this doesn't mean that it's better than other music. So, for example, if you look at Indian classical music, has way, way more sophisticated rhythm than we virtually ever have in Western classical or Western music at all. So, it's not that it's better, it's just something that's relatively unique. And actually, for that reason, if we're not careful, it takes us away from that natural horizontal flow that music has. So the vertical way of perceiving this is C sharp minor, subdominant, and that is vertical. Now, to me, that is not, it can't just be truly only vertical, because this, in Western classical music, it's all driven by, and again, this is a topic for a whole different video, it's all driven by the relationship between, in particular, the dominant wanting, that is very, very unstable. It wants to go there. It's like, and everyone knows that needs to resolve. And so but to me, that's a horizontal thing, because there's a horizontal pull that you want it to take you somewhere else. Now, I'm bringing this up because when I was researching, making this video, there's a study that shows that if you get musicians to focus in different ways, to get them to focus in a horizontal way, and you get them to focus in a vertical way, they basically hear different amounts of musical tension. Now, I've made other videos and podcast episodes about this, and I'll include it in the description below, because tension and release in music, again, is another one of the most important things that you need to understand in order to be musical. So if I play like this, presumably you're going to hear there's something really missing there. And, everyone loves Chopin as well for all the rubato. Rubato depends on an instinctive understanding of tension and release. So if I'm talking about this in terms of tension and release, and actually if I include the beginning, tension, because we can't just go, is that the end? If I play again, the end, you go, that's not the end. That doesn't feel complete. That's because that is a tension. That is literally a feeling of tension that makes you feel that's not the end. And then I come in. That is a feeling of release. So we already start with the feeling of release, and you get release on the tonic, on the home key. The home is like tension. And that's why he puts a trill on it. The trill is to draw out that moment of tension. The end. Well, no, that obviously isn't the end. So, when I read this research study that says that when you listen vertically, you hear tension, but when you listen horizontally, you stop hearing tension, I'm very dubious about this. Now, harmony is a vertical thing. To hear this harmony is a vertical thing because there's many notes all at the same time. And then here, that is like as if you're hearing all these notes all at the same time, but they have a context. You're going from this one to this one. And I'm teasing you there. I'm teasing. And that's what good musicians do. It's knowing just the right amount of teasing. If I just do this, it's like, that was no tension. This, I'm going to really over-exaggerate it. And that's too much. That's not in good taste, and also destroys the structure of the whole piece. So somewhere in the middle, something like that is, a nice balance of pulling that tension out. Now, that requires an awareness of this harmony, wanting to resolve back to this harmony. But it's a balance. It's a balance between the vertical and the horizontal. And then dominant harmonies have tension. And it resolves. Another dominant, tension, and it resolves. More tension, tension, the end. That's not the end. So, and I guess the balance there is that you're carrying this tension and release while also really letting that melody sing. Let me try and just get the tension and release without really listening to the melody. It's going to be really hard. Yeah, I just can't. It's so difficult. It's so difficult to just split that melody off. I think what I'm demonstrating here is, to me, the balance, the nice balance that sort of happens naturally when you are, letting the melody sing. and having an awareness of tension and release and how that feels. And I think that, the way that I describe it to people, and I've spoken about this in past videos, there's a tension that builds up in the chest. I call it like interoception of the chest, interoception of the feelings inside you. So I'm following the melody horizontally, and rather than consciously think, this is C sharp minor, this is F sharp minor, this is the secondary dominant C sharp dominant 7 resolving to the subdominant, and then there's a first inversion, dominant 7th, instead, and then thinking how I'm going to bring out the tensions in that. No. All I've got to do is just hear the music and literally feel in my chest what tension am I feeling in this moment. And this is when people talk about playing with heart, playing with soul, playing with emotion. All you've got to do is just feel this tension and release in the chest. And hopefully you feel some of that as I play it, because, playing music is just like a magic telepathy. If I'm feeling it, if I'm imagining it and feeling it, you're going to imagine it and feel it as well. So how can we practice this in a tangible way that is practicable? Well, you won't be surprised to hear that probably the most useful way of doing it is just to sing. Because when we play the note on the piano, it's like it just disappears. This melody, it can just disappear. It's just the attention goes to the left hand. If I have to sing it, da, 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 I have to keep hearing it. And what a lot of my students do when they don't have this ability to keep on listening to that melody and just the mind just goes straight to the left hand. Again, this is going to be totally against all my habits. Let me try and do it the way that a student might do it, because their attention just gets pulled to how the left hand sounds. So they might do something that sounds like this. Da bum 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 da da bum bum. This is really hard for me to do. Dum bum 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 da 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 bum 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 bum. So it's like they can't help but sing whatever finger needs to move instead of ba da 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 da. Now you can see that my left hand is moving. I'm going to even sing without the right hand, and this is another thing that you can do. You can literally not play it. Da 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 da. And most of you at home are probably going to find that incredibly difficult. And for that reason, this is what you should practice, even though it's going to be very uncomfortable, very difficult. You just build it up slowly, and then don't go any further until you can go, bum, bum. And you start off with singing this, bum, and then you just, you feel into your vocal cords, your throat, and you just imagine holding on, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba. This is such an important skill. I cannot overemphasize how important that is. Now, something else that I've spoken about in previous videos is the importance of not staring at the notes that you don't want to have your awareness on. So what you might find difficult is if you are staring at like these notes, the C sharp, the G sharp, the E, the C sharp. So if you're going, da, I mean, I can do it because I'm more experienced, but you're going to find that really hard. Now, if you close your eyes and get used to how you can play this in a way that you don't have to imagine it. And I don't mean like close your eyes and then stare in your imagination at the notes. No, you have to feel it. This is the thing that you feel. Again, I do other videos about this. This is a little bit too much to go into in this video, but it's switching from looking to feeling. You're feeling your way around this. So if you can do this with your eyes closed, turning your head from side to side, having a conversation. So you're not having to think about it. It's just a thing that you feel. And this is the point of practicing. The point of practicing is to turn this into muscle memory to the point where you can do this subconsciously on autopilot in your sleep. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that then when you get up and perform, it's all autopilot and muscle memory, because, that's not a good thing. But you need to have that step. You need to have that step in there. You just feel this. You don't have to think about it at all. And then once you can do this without having to think about it, you can then go dum, da, dum, da. Because if you're having to think about every note as you play it, you won't be able to do this. And this is going to hold you back. And again, I did a previous video. I think it's a criminally underviewed video, if I say so myself. And it's basically on what plane crashes and playing the piano have in common. And it's basically to do with being mentally, cognitively overloaded, the dangers of thinking too much about everything that you're doing. It doesn't leave the leftover awareness to be able to go bum, dum. So a lot of practicing, I think that what a lot of my students do is they practice until they can play it thinking really hard about it, but that's never going to be musical. You have to figure out how to practice it until it just you can play it automatically. Now, one of the podcast episodes that I did, and I'm going to be making a video version of it soon. So stay tuned for that. Click on like and subscribe and the bell icon to, be notified for all my future videos. But basically, one of my podcast episodes is I talk about a magic wand technique. And I'm not going to talk about it too much now, but it's one way of fixing. It's a tangible way of fixing the way that most of my students practice, which is not to make it effortless. If I look like I'm playing, in a relatively effortless way, it leaves me with more leftover awareness to really hear it and feel it, rather than going, this will probably look familiar to you. Now, if you play like that, that is not because you have a lack of talent. It's because you're not practicing properly. And when I say properly, it's not like you sit down and do scales and you do, it's the mental approach that you have to it. So again, so many of my other videos talk about all of this. The way that I teach is it's so much about this psychology of stuff. And yes, once you can do that, once you can then, be able to put this into autopilot, and in my other videos I show how you practice to get that kind of thing, then working on technique and technical stuff and scales, then that stuff is useful for you, and that's all part of how you do that. So then once you've got this and you can go bum, bum, and if you can't do that, it's one sign that you haven't got the left hand learn fluently enough. And also, if you notice me playing it, my whole arm and my whole wrist has to move for this. And I think what a lot of my students would do is just not move their hand. No, it's all part of, being in your body. Anyway, way too much to go into in this lesson. And then you can go, da. Let me do it without the trill. Dum, dum, dum. And then you practice that. Dum, dum. And then you can put the first two together. This is like chaining, and I talked about chaining in the previous video. Dum, dum. Then you can loop it. Ba, dum, da, dum. But what I'm not expecting all of you guys at home to do is just to immediately go da, 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 dum, dum. da, 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 because obviously that is more advanced. I'm not just saying, hey, just do that. I'm showing you it's probably going to be difficult and you're probably going to have to build it up very carefully bit by bit. But this is one way that you practice it. And then another thing that you can do is literally like just spend a little bit of time. Just, it helps if you look at the hand that you want to listen to. So this is okay here. If I look at my right hand playing the G sharp, look at my right hand playing the F sharp, and then I'm not looking at my left hand. So the left hand has to be feeling. I have to feel my way around it all. So here I am looking at the right hand. I'll loop it. It's basically a meditation. It's a meditation. And can I keep my awareness on the sound of that note? So an analogy that I find really, really useful, and I use it all the time with my students. I'm not sure I've ever used it before in a video, but imagine that we are floating with the current down a stream. The music, time, our whole feeling of time and music is, think of time as something that is flowing. You can't stop the flow of time. Time flows and you flow with it. So if I'm playing, that is my mind. My mind is going at the speed of the current. It is following with it. And what I'm about to describe is, I'm going to go into it in a little bit of detail in a minute. But in past videos and podcast episodes, I've talked about the differences between the two brain hemispheres and how this can be an incredibly useful way to understand these concepts. And they operate in very different ways. And I was very apprehensive about making this video because at its heart, what I'm trying to explain is the difference between two completely different states of mentally existing. They are different ways of being. So if you think about Buddhism and meditation and things that are spiritual and things that are difficult to kind of grasp and hold and logically pick apart, these are the kinds of things that, in this video, I'm attempting to explain. This concept of horizontal, it's not just a logical concept. It's actually a way of being. It's a way of existing that is different from a vertical way of dissecting things and analyzing things. So the river metaphor is quite useful to begin with. And, it's a thing that you have to feel as well as be able to intellectually understand, which is, incidentally what people say about Buddhism and stuff. But anyway, and by the way, if you are religious, if you Christian or whatever other religion you might have, I'm not saying that Buddhism is a different thing to that. In fact, a lot of people would argue, is Buddhism even a religion? It's more just a series of tools that give you the ability to experience different states of mind that they don't clash with any religion. Anyway, to get back to the river analogy, I'm flowing along with the river. I'm not trying to fight it. I'm just with it. Now, in contrast, what a lot of my students do is they try and cling on to the side. They try and hold on to the side of the river while it's trying to kind of drag them. And it's like they're there holding on because they're trying to go this thing and then this thing here. And then this note here. This note here. This note here. Now, it's not just the way it sounds. It's like what my mind is doing. That my mind is like, oh, let me try and hold on to this thing here. It's like a trying to get this particular thing. So it's like, and if you're thinking, I must get the right note here, I must do the trill in this particular way, I must put this finger on here. So I'm going to start the trill here. I must get a beautiful tone here. Can you kind of hear that you sort of get stuck, you get glued? It's like a psychological trying to hang on. So again, let me try and play it in this way, because you'll probably recognize this in your own playing. And, when I think in that way, I even start getting notes wrong, because it is harder for me to play the right notes when I'm chopping everything up one by one, because my cognitive load just shoots up. That is using up so much more of my cognitive load, thinking about every single thing. So horizontal is you flow. Now, don't get me wrong, in order to get to that, you might need to do a little bit of vertical, you can't just like, oh, hey, just flow and just play everything right. If you don't know the notes, if you're not good at sight reading, and incidentally, sight reading absolutely is so much easier when you are going horizontally, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So if you don't know the notes and you're not confident, and yeah, you're going to need to go, okay, this note, this note, this note, this note, this note, and you need to know what fingers to put on them. You need to get used to it. But this is the thing. This is where most of my students get stuck, because they go, well, I have to think about it like that. But yes, but you don't have to carry on thinking about that forever from now on. So the very first time that you look at it, you might need to learn the notes in a very vertical way. But then the whole point of practicing it is to make this something that feels effortless and easy. So for example, back to chaining, we can just start with the first two notes. Just play the first two notes until they feel easy. And then you add the third one. And then what a lot of people will do is without doing it this way, they might just go. And then for the rest of the time they ever play this piece, they have to think about the notes one by one. But you could just practice it. Until you can fall asleep. You just feel it, so for a few seconds, for like 10 seconds, this feels difficult, and you just do it. And the aim, magic wand, is like, you want this to just feel absolutely effortless. Then you add the final note. And in the beginning, that's going to be tricky. It's going to feel awkward. You're going to have to figure out what to do with your wrist. And then once you've got this, you make it something that flows. So it's not like literally just, oh, hey, just sit down and just play the whole thing flowing down the river. No. Like obviously, I'm not saying you should just instantly be able to sit down and do that. But what most people miss is that is the goal. The goal is not... And the reason why people just play like that and never get out of that is because however you practice is however you're going to perform. And if you're always practicing like this, it's always going to sound like that. But what you can do is like every piano teacher ever, pretty much any decent piano teacher ever, the two primary things that every single piano teacher has in common will be they'll say, do it slower and break it down into smaller pieces. So, slower, just this, slow. And not just for the sake of being slow, but so that you free up your mind, you feel into it until this is something that just feels easy to you. Because if you're trying to play the whole thing, and it feels slightly tricky, it's always going to feel tricky. So you split it into tiny, tiny things, slow, until that just feels absolutely effortless. Dum, dum. Now you can flow down the river with it. Dum, da, 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 dum, dum. You are flowing down that river, not clinging on. And so the clinging on is it's like the equivalent of taking photographs of things that aren't related. There's a photograph, 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 and you put the photographs together, photograph, 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 versus a moving picture. moving picture where everything just flows into each other. Now, in past videos and podcast episodes, I talk about the brain hemispheres and how this is incredibly useful. The left brain hemisphere. So for a long time, I thought that the brain hemispheres had been debunked. They haven't really been debunked at all. They operate in sort of very distinct ways. Now, the thing that upsets neuropsychologists is when you sort of overgeneralize, and I am going to overgeneralize. But it's a useful way of understanding the two different ways that our brain can perceive the world. And, I've spoken in previous videos and podcast episodes about this amazing book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. And, he does this amazing job of talking in quite a philosophical way about what these brain hemispheres can teach us. And they both experience time in very different ways. The way that the right brain hemisphere experiences time, it's just that sensation that time is a current. It's just an always unfolding now. There's just a constant now that you're in the current of. With people who have right brain hemisphere damage, and you get them to describe time and clocks and all this kind of stuff, there is no sense of constant unfolding narrative. It's just sort of abstract, unrelated snapshot, like camera snapshot moments in time that are very fragmented without a sense of how they all join together. So the left brain hemisphere way of playing is like this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing, without the sense of how they flow into each other. The right brain hemisphere, so it's a phrase, and you'll hear the piano teachers go on and on and on about phrasing. Dum, da, 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 dum, dum, dum. Because it's like it's a almost like a unit of information, in like the way that language has a sentence. Dum, da, 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 dum, da. You can think of it as a gesture as well. Dum, na, 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 da, da. And that's very right brain, that sense of what does this whole thing mean? A sense of narrative. What, it's like, it's, you can think of it as someone telling a story, as opposed to a left brain, which will just go, there's a note with a trill, and then there's a note, and then there's a note. And, I think that what most people expect from lessons and when they learn to play the piano, and what they expect probably concert pianists do, is a sense of getting more and more intellectual about exactly, how you shape this in a very, you do this, then you do this, and then you do that, and then that tails off. And now I think that, okay, some concert pianists probably do play like that. I don't like their playing. I prefer the ones who play in that much more just, you just feel it. That's too much, but you get the idea. I'm exaggerating it to kind of make a point. The more you can exaggerate something, this is another way of practicing. If you can exaggerate it, you understand it more. So you get a sense that I'm saying something. It's not just notes that I'm playing. It all means something. And again, and this is why it's so interesting and useful to look at all the differences between the brain hemispheres, because there's so many different layers to all the things that this hemisphere does, that this one does. And the more that we can get into a right hemisphere state as we're playing, the more it fixes all the things that makes us sound like we're not musical, like we're not good musicians. Now, don't get me wrong. We need the left brain hemisphere. And like Ian McGilchrist says over and over again in his book, The Master and His Emissary, he's not saying that the left hemisphere isn't important and that we shouldn't have it. We absolutely need it. His argument in his book is that we live in an era where the left brain hemisphere thinks that it should be in charge, and it should not be in charge. A left hemisphere in charge thinks that everything should be like this. And we need to gently encourage and gently persuade the left brain hemisphere that it doesn't need to be in charge. But, this is for a whole different video anyway. And, it's interesting as well, because one of the things that the left hemisphere really isn't good at, and again, I'm overgeneralizing, but you can see this in people who have right brain hemisphere damage. And if you want to know more about the brain hemispheres and the way that I kind of generalize stuff and, all the caveats to that, do go and watch an earlier video that I made. There'll be a link in the description below. Now, the left brain hemisphere, as an overgeneralization, but a useful one, isn't good at narratives, at stories, at sort of things that come together in an unfolding of meaning. The right hemisphere is much better at meaning, at stories, any sense of storytelling and drama and narrative. So if I'm playing, I want some sense that I am kind of telling a story rather than a series of unrelated moments. This is a story that I'm telling. There's a sense of drama about the whole thing. And then another thing that this right hemisphere flowing with the current gives you, and I'm always talking about this with my students in my lessons, it's about the sense of being able to anticipate, being able to see where you're going. So I think I talk about the analogy of just walking down a road. If you're just walking down the street, you don't need to stare at your feet to see where you're going. You just see where you're going. And when I'm playing, there's a similar sense that I just kind of know where I'm going. What I'm not doing is staring at my feet. That's like staring down. I'm looking at where I'm going. It's like, I'm going for a nice walk and appreciating what's around me. Or flowing with the river. And as I'm flowing with the river, I see what's ahead of me, I see what's behind me, I see what's to the side of me. I'm flowing, but I'm not just staring at the spot where I'm at. This is one of the tricky things, that when people talk about being in the moment, being in the moment is such a difficult thing to describe. I'm going to try not to go too deep down the rabbit hole on this one. But when you're in the moment, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, because I was on a retreat, and in a meditation retreat, and in the meditation retreat, the person taking the retreat basically asked the question at one point, what is the present moment? What is now? Can you sort of think about what is the present moment? And in that moment in time, in that retreat, I guess I was in a very left-brained state of mind. And what I basically described was, it's like an infinitely thinly sliced razor blade of a now that is then just gone. It's like the now is gone. This now is gone. This now, like, to me, in that moment in time, when I thought about what is now, what is the present moment, it's like it's like a snapshot that you slice so thinly, and that is now. Now, then, when I described that, it was like I did not give the correct answer. It was so obvious that people were looking at me like, what? And the person taking that particular retreat was like, what? No, it was interesting. We talked about it in a group, whatever you call those things afterwards when you then discuss it. What people were describing more was just this feeling of being in the flow of a now, which is so much harder to describe. And it's so much harder to describe because the left brain hemisphere is the hemisphere that describes in very logical, very analytical ways. And the right hemisphere it's a much more felt, much more sort of beyond words, which is why religions and spiritual experiences and all this kind of stuff, they're very difficult to dissect and talk about in words. And, that's why, people who study Buddhism don't just study and go, well, that's it. I understand it all now. There's nothing left to understand. I'm enlightened. It's all about how you get the right hemisphere to let go of this sort of chopping up kind of thing. So the feeling of time, it's very difficult to chop up and analyze. But when you're really in that felt sense of it, you just flow along with it. And one way that I like to think about it is like there's a constant sort of tapestry, for want of a better word. It's a constant now that links the now to every moment that's ever happened in the past, to every moment that's ever going to happen in the future. It's one constant it's a constant ribbon. I don't know. I don't really have words for it, but it's an endlessly unfolding current of now that you flow with. It's so hard to put it into words. And when you're in that, it's not like you're staring at it like that very thin razor blade, this now. No, you look around you and you feel this sense of what's coming up and what went behind you. It's not narrow. In the sense that, and like literally as well, one of the main differences between the left brain hemisphere and the right brain hemisphere is that the left brain hemisphere focuses in a narrow way on individual things, and the right brain hemisphere has a much broader way of perceiving entire things all at the same time. A way of perceiving a C-sharp minor chord, C-sharp minor chord, F-sharp minor chord, C-sharp minor chord, is much more of a right brain way of perceiving it than just like one note at a time. So it's sort of, if I'm playing, my right brain hemisphere perceives all of this as sort of one thing rather than this note, this note, this note, this note. Anyway, so another potentially kind of useful way of possibly thinking about this is whatever happened to holograms? Holograms were huge in the 80s, and people tend not to sort of ever talk about holograms anymore. But the way that they work is they sort of contain like a 3D image within like the hologram. And then if you break it, if you sort of break it into smaller pieces, every smaller piece contains exactly the same thing that the larger one had. So let's say you made a hologram of this room or whatever, and then you smashed the hologram and had one tiny little piece of it and looked at it, it would still be a hologram of the whole room. And, again, this is sort of a really difficult thing to describe, but when I'm playing, it's like in the moment that I'm playing any note, or, I'm just existing in this piece, I'm already experiencing the entire piece within that small moment. And it's so hard to put into words that, again, it's a very right brain hemisphere experience. And the closest that I can think to it, like, I think with classical music, with a piece like Chopin, kind of, you can think of this like as architecture, as like a cathedral. And you look at the cathedral. When you look at a cathedral, it has a unity. It's not like this bit here and this thing here and that thing there, and they don't really connect. It's one organic whole. And when you look at a gargoyle or you look at one arch, you're aware of the entire thing at the same time as you're looking at the one detail, because it's also made in that kind of organic a way. Or, I don't know, like, talking of organic, if you're looking at a person and you look at their eyes or you look at their nose, it's not just eyes or just a nose. You're aware that it belongs to a whole person. And I think as I play, that there is an awareness of where that is in the architecture and the structure of the entire thing, but it's not intellectual, it's not logical. I feel it as a living being, and it's just sort of all at once. It's very, very difficult for me to put into words. I think I've not used it before, but the analogy of looking at a feature on a person, like a nose, and just not seeing just a nose, it's like that. I'm just seeing a part of the whole piece. And I think you don't get much more horizontal than that, because it's like the horizontal awareness of the entire piece of music all at once in any given moment that you're playing. That is, you don't get much more horizontal than that. And, I think, again, a lot of people probably believe that to be a good pianist is a question of just making your fingers very dexterous and go on the correct notes at the right times in the right rhythms. And I mean, yes, to some degree, yes, but also no. I find it interesting that, when you look at how examination boards rate the difficulty levels of stuff. So, for example, I did a fellowship diploma recently. When you look at the stuff, and the fellowship is the highest level one, when you look at the stuff that they put in the level below that, which is like the licentiate, that's where you get the technically most difficult stuff, like Chopin etudes, Liszt studies and etudes. Is you get all the most difficult technical stuff actually in the level below. What the level above that is all about, it's about, can you play a 50-minute long sonata or, very large scale piece, and can you make it hold together? Can you make it something that's organic and doesn't just fall apart? That is the most difficult skill for any musician. It's more difficult than the technique. Like you can go to YouTube and see plenty of 10-year-old kids with all the technique that a concert pianist would ever need. But what you have beyond that is the ability to play. And, this is why things like Chopin Nocturnes are sort of deceptively difficult to really, truly play beautifully. And if I'm honest, most recordings of the Chopin Nocturnes I'm not that keen on. There are a handful of Nocturne recordings that have ever been made that I actually kind of like. And, this is all about, do you feel the essence of the entire thing? Rather than just, what a lot of people will do. And, don't get me started on this. It's when people play Chopin with their shoulders and they'll go like... like hunchbacks. And the problem with that is it's just small moments. It's like milking small moments where you don't get a feeling of like the piece as a whole, and it doesn't feel genuine either, Anyway, so I've gone on and on and on about that. There were so many other things I wanted to talk about, but this whole thing has just sort of, ballooned. What I really wanted to talk about was sight reading, because the ability to have this horizontal awareness with sight reading is so useful, so much so that I made an app. And I was going to talk about the app, but this is going to have to be for a whole different video. But there'll be a link to information about the app below and above. So, I encourage you to look at the app there. I think that there is no better way to learn to sight read, because this method of learning to sight read is about developing this horizontal way of being. And, it's very difficult to describe because, for want of a better way of putting it, and that the risk, I'm scared I'm going to scare people off by saying this, but when I describe this very, very, organic horizontal way of, and I was talking about being on the river, flowing with time and being able to look around and have this spacious sense of what's around you in the sense of time. What we're really talking about are things like, what do you call them? Like altered states of consciousness and spiritual states of consciousness and all this kind of stuff. Now, to me, to be musical, to be deeply musical, is how you develop what some people call an altered state of consciousness. You can't just be in a like, I'm going to do my taxes, I'm going to, analyze something and just sit down and go, music doesn't work that way. It's an art. And what I'm trying to describe in this video is the impossible task of describing how do you do this art in a way that I can sort of explain in a way that most people are going to be able to understand. It isn't something that you just analyze and slice up and go, this is what it is. The brain hemispheres is the closest I found of being able to explain what it truly feels like, and also the things that you have to practice. Now, I've barely even started, but once you start understanding the differences between the left brain hemisphere and the right brain hemisphere, and you understand all the different things the different characteristics that they have, what it does is it gives you a roadmap. It shows you, if you want more of the right brain hemisphere stuff, have less of these things and more of these things, and these are things that you can practice. Now, I've not made the videos or the podcast episodes yet, but these will be coming up, where I'm just going to give you more and more and more of the practical, tangible things that this understanding, this like neuroscientific understanding can give you of, well, do these things if you want more of these kinds of experiences. But hopefully I've demonstrated to you in a way that you can kind of resonate with and sort of hear in the way that I demonstrate it, that, okay, maybe I'm onto something, you know. Anyway, so after all of that, just very quickly, do please click on like and subscribe. And, you know, it's going to take me ages to edit this video. It's always nice to have nice feedback and to make it, you know, all worthwhile. And also it helps to have more people view it and, you know, to get these helpful. Hopefully you agree this is helpful and then more people can see it. Also, I do have space in my studio at the moment for more online students. There'll be a link in the description below if you're interested. It's not all just like what some people would think woo-woo. It's not just woo-woo, meditate, just flow. Also, all the nitty-gritty technical stuff. Absolutely do all the technical stuff as well. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you at the next video. Take care. Look after yourselves. If you're not going to watch another video of mine, go do some more practice. Anyway, take care. Bye.